Hi, welcome back to Stock Talk. So several stocks came through, numerous requests, a lot earlier than normal. So we've got a good show with some really diverse symbols. But I do want to start out with a quick lesson. Even though there are a lot of symbols, I do want to spend a few minutes on something related to ADX, just to give you a better idea, I think, of how it's calculated and how the three lines work together. I just think it's worth spending a few minutes going through that. So I want to get into the agenda. Again, it's on ADX DI, really. It's more about the DI lines this time. I want to explain how they work in relation to the ADX, how they have an impact on ADX slope, and also how they show sort of the contraction and expansion phase that typically takes place over time. So after I do that, I'm going to get into all the symbols that came through. I'm trying to catch everybody's symbols this week. I didn't get through everybody's last week. I'll make up for that this week, and we'll get into those in a minute. Before I do that, just to let you know, my services can be found at rabilstockresearch.com. The show is designed for me to analyze your stock picks, and my service is really designed to provide you stock picks. I go through thousands of charts and try and identify what I think are the most dynamic looking patterns. So that is, and also you can get a discount on the service for the first 2 months if you plug in the coupon code StockTalk for the individual monthly package. You'll see that pop up. So feel free to take a look at that. Let's go ahead and get into this discussion on ADX and really about the DI line. So I've got this chart. It's a daily chart of Morgan Stanley up, and what I want to show is we can see where this blue line here, this ADX line, is making big moves to the upside and then pretty good declines to the downside. And you watch this movement and try to understand what is really causing that. And so today I want to clear that up, and hopefully I can do it pretty briefly. So the green line represents the strength of the buyers. And this green line making higher highs and higher lows here on this left side is showing that the buyers are gaining strength through this period up till here, where we're making higher highs and higher lows in the green line. And so that, again, that's the demand of the buyers. Now the red line is showing the strength and or weakness of the sellers. So as this is dropping down, it's showing the selling is weakening. And so we can see where each of these lines peaked and where this found a low. So we can see the buyers peaked here, the sellers found a low here and started to turn up. So if I start to look at these this way, I can sort of say, okay, I've got a move to the upside here and a move to the downside here. And where they're at, as these are expanding, so this is an expansion phase because green is moving away from red. They're moving, the distance between these two lines is getting further and further apart. When that happens, this blue line is going to be rising. So that's when we're going to see the blue line rising, the ADX line. It's really showing the difference between the two lines. Now, it doesn't care if red is on top and green is on the bottom, or if green is on top like this and red on the bottom. It just doesn't matter. It really doesn't care which direction the market's going. It's looking for strength in either direction. So this blue line is going to go up when they're separating. And you can see when these lines start to come together. So if we draw this same line and we show this coming together like this, now we're seeing a contraction phase. So this is an expansion phase, and this is a contraction phase. And during this contraction phase, we see the line dropping. And then we go through another expansion phase here where the lines go apart again, and look at what the ADX line does. The blue line starts to rise. And so this is the cycle you want to understand, what's causing this line to do what it's doing. So you get an edge if you understand what green and red DI lines are doing and when they start to separate. So I'm always on the lookout for when they're together and then it looks like they're showing signs of starting to separate. So, you know, we can see these phases, and it just happens over and over again. Here's another expansion phase. And then we went through an extensive contraction phase where red actually overran a little bit, but then they came back together, and we can see how low this ADX got during this period. So this is a pretty significant phase of contraction where these lines come together. Then they try to start to expand again, and you can see the ADX rising from a low level. So when we see the ADX at a low level, we know that we've been through a contraction phase, and we probably should be on the lookout for signs on price that things are starting to improve. And you can see where we're getting these opposing trend patterns develop when ADX is low. So we've actually got another one forming right now after another contraction phase. So this line, these green lines came together, these lines came together like this, and then they've really just been chopping sideways underneath 25, and that causes a low ADX. So if you understand this pattern, you can see where we're going through expansion here, and then we go through contraction here. And this cycle just continues. And so you want to look for periods where we end contraction. Those are typically your best times when we've gone through a contraction phase. That's really when you want to start to look at price and look for entry points. So I hope this makes sense. If not, go ahead and post some questions. But let's go ahead and get into the analysis of the stocks that came through. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the requests that came through, we have tech stocks, a number of different tech areas, semi, software, hardware, telecom equipment. Then we've got some basic materials, different areas of basic materials, a couple different consumer cyclicals, all types of financials, and healthcare, energy, and even a utility. So a lot of diversity in the request. So this is great. So let's go ahead and get going here. CRWD, Crowdstrike. So what I like to do when I look at a chart, especially when it's not something that this isn't something I prepare for. As I said, I like to give you just what my first thought process is when I start looking at this, and monthly, weekly, daily pop up. And I'm looking for where the tradable trend is. And, you know, while the monthly is a strong trend, the ADX is strong, and you've been trending to the upside, you really haven't had opportunities near the 18. So I wouldn't consider this a tradable trend. The area really, to me, that looks, or the time frame that's a tradable trend is the weekly. So I want to evaluate that. And so that's how I look at this. I'm looking for pullbacks towards the 18. But if you notice what happened, I like to look at the momentum. And so from this point on, from where we broke out here and kind of got going again, I like that signal right there. I obviously like this pullback, and I like that pullback. But once we broke out here and have started to move higher, notice what ADX has done. And not only ADX, but look at the green DI. Green DI has not been able to hold itself above 25. Every time it goes up, it comes back down. Did it again here, it comes back down. Now it's trying again. But I'm a little reluctant to be thinking about this. We've made a new high and then pulled back, and then made another new high and then pulled back. Now this moving average environment isn't bad. We have a rising 18 and a 40, but I would be very reluctant to play this based on what's taken place, because we broke out and have followed through the upside. This is the third new high without getting even DI confirmation. So I would be really careful here. If I were going to play this, I'd probably only be a kind of like a short-term trader. And with this recent gap that just took place, you know, it probably would just kind of take it off the blocks for me. Now, if I'm in this, I am going to stay below the last low. I don't want this to take me out necessarily, but I don't know that I want to be a buyer now. I would use this last swing low. And it continues to make higher swing bottoms on the weekly. And if it turns back up to a new high, you could come underneath this last one as well. AMAT. So this is pretty interesting. We had the monthly chart make this really strong move, and we've been marking time going sideways and really still have a nice ADX pattern. And now we have a low ADX pattern on the weekly. So strong reading. If we look at the weekly, strong reading, and then we've worked off the overbought condition by going sideways in price. That's usually a good sign. Look at how the ADX was up in the 50s and now it's down to 11. And we couldn't really get red DI above 25. So there really hasn't been much on the terms of the selling side. The only issue I have with this is by the time this actually breaks out, it's going to be pretty close to earnings. I think earnings are like next week or something like that. So just be conscious of that. But that's really the only thing that would hold me back on this. I do like the setup, and I like what's going on here. Looks like there's a significant amount of support at 125. DAN. Nice up move on the monthly chart, and now we've gotten a pullback. Now, I mean, one thing I do want to mention, this did rally up and pull back, and if you notice, the ADX really only got to 25. I typically like to see it clearly through, like maybe up a little bit closer to 30. So I wouldn't consider this really powerful, but it wouldn't really prevent me from necessarily doing this for a potential trade up to, say, the mid or the higher 20s or something like that. It is trying to set up here on the weekly chart. I think the best strategy here is to make this come up through 25. Look at the daily chart. You see this gap down? I don't really want to buy right underneath a gap down level. I like to see it get through this key level, which has been kind of pretty important, say, for the last 6 to 9 months. Ciena looks like after a long sideways period. I mean, this has really been going sideways since July of last year. Big drop, came back up, but then just kind of has stayed contained between this swing here. And now it looks like it's trying to get going. Now, one of the things I have mentioned in the past, and I'm not a big fan of buying a breakout when it's overbought. You see how far away this is? So the 18-week is at 55. That's pretty far away. But the 18-day is down at 54. I mean, it definitely looks stretched to me. So I would look for some kind of either let it break out and then buy the first pullback, or if it does, and preferably I'd like to see it pull back first before it attempts to break out. And if it does something like that, I think this is a pretty good support zone here at 57, 58. So if we can form some kind of a shallow pullback, a little handle or something like that, I think this would be a little bit more attractive from that standpoint, but definitely one to watch. I like what's going on with Hewlett. This is something I've been highlighting. I think you know, it's a 2 time frame, monthly, weekly. So the monthly looks strong and has pulled back. The weekly has gone through this, you know, if you remember from the show from a couple weeks ago where I talk about an opposing trend trigger, that's really what's taken place. We've got a weekly, which was an opposing trend because the price was below the 18 and the 18 was below the 40, and that's going counter to the monthly trend. And now we've just triggered back above. We've closed back above both moving averages, and we have a MACD signal line reversal at the zero line reversal with low ADX. So that's really a pretty attractive pattern. I think there's a pretty good chance this wants to go back and test the mid-30s. That was kind of sharp the way that pulled back, so expect some resistance up there. But yeah, I do like the looks of this. Splunk has had a rough road here. I mean, let's just look at the monthly chart. It was trending okay, and then it got really volatile. When the market sold off, it ran up, but then look at this pullback, ferocious decline that ran right through the 18-month line. And now we have gathered ourselves a little bit and have gotten a rally back to this 18-month line. But I don't consider this all that attractive, and we've already made a one higher low, another higher low, and you know, so we're starting to trend on the weekly, but I mean, if you look at it on the monthly, it's just not set up that way. So I might consider playing this either short term off the daily, but I think the best course of action here is maybe to look and see if it has an orderly pullback towards the 18-week. That might be an opportunity to buy for a trade to the upside. I really only see this as a trade, but it could work up, say, to 175, 185, something like that. DuPont is interesting to me. If you go through and look at a lot of the chemical stocks, showing some improvement. Well, what they're doing, I should say, is they've gone through this corrective pattern. Now, this was a little different. It was an ABC, but this was almost like a double top here. A lot of the others made a move kind of like this, where they made a lower high and a lower low, and now they're starting to kick in. There's definitely some stocks like Dow coming into support. CTVA is actually doing something very similar to DuPont here. Look at how it found support right at the 18-month. We got a little pinch play. So I like the way this is going. You got to look for some kind of a little higher bottom here now. Somewhere between 75 and 77 would probably be the entry I'd be looking for on a little minor pullback, or if it just pauses here for 3 to 5 days. Okay, on Semiconductor. So this has been in a power trend. This is just a really powerful stock. It just continues to kind of trend to the upside, and we had a big gap up on earnings, and we're getting confirmation. So let me just point this out. So where we had a big reading here to the upside, and then we've consolidated, and now we're going up. Now, what I like about this, I see that the ADX has not confirmed yet, but look at what green DI is doing. Remember, green DI is the plus DI. It's the strength of the buyers, and we're making a higher high from that standpoint. So even though the ADX line hasn't confirmed this move, I'm seeing at least confirmation from the DI line, the plus DI. And so when I see that, I'm okay with this. It's not a stock that I'd buy, obviously, because of how big of a move it's made. But I would tell you that I would hold this if I'm in it, and I don't think this is going to top out this year. It kind of made this big blowout move. I would be thinking more like first quarter next year, just because it's been such a strong trending stock this year. I think odds favor this closing near its highs. Old Republic, so this is the first of the financials, and we've got this similar pattern that has developed. So let me just show this on the weekly. Where we made this strong move to the upside. Okay, this is a nice move to the upside. You can know that it's strong because you got confirmation on an ADX basis, and we did get a good reading on the MACD as well. But I really like to use this measure here, and if we get up to 45, 50, or above 50 like this did, we know that's a pretty powerful move. But when it gets to this peak and makes this move and breaks out, it's overbought, and you can see that from how far the MACD is from its signal line. So we want the MACD to work its way back down. So that's really what's been taking place here, and I think this is getting kind of attractive. The one thing I'd be looking for now is a little higher bottom, maybe a test of this 18 before it's ready to go. If we break out from here, we'll be overbought breaking out. So again, I like to look for like a little consolidation pattern prior to the breakout, or let it break out and buy the first pullback if it plays out that way. But this is set up and something you really want to be watching pretty close. Carlyle Group has been a really nice trend. Now, if you look at these three, test yourself right now before I say anything. What is the tradable trend? Which time frame? You know, we can see the monthly is in a strong trend, powerful trend, but it's not really tradable because it is refusing to pull back to the 18. The daily was chomping around and kind of overrunning both moving averages, and now it's kind of taken off, but it hasn't pulled back. We have a decent tradable trend on the weekly chart, because look at how they're parallel, the 18 and the 40, and we have been getting pullbacks to that. So I think this looks pretty attractive. It's just a short term, it's overdone. You got to get a pullback, and because the weekly is the tradable trend, now we know we want to pull back a little closer to the 18 week. That's how I would look at this, and the momentum is really good, so you can buy a pullback in it. Okay, so PCG. So let's just evaluate this on the monthly. We had just a devastating decline to the downside that found support in 2019. Has really just been working sideways, and it really doesn't have much of a heartbeat, right? I mean, it's just sideways consolidation, and quiet periods are necessary when you're building up you know, new support. When you get a quiet base like this working sideways, I think it's a positive. The problem is it's really early, and we still have a flat moving average, and we have a declining 40. So I think if we pop here, they're going to be short term until this gets more width to the base and gets a bigger base and works sideways a little bit longer. Now, the reason why I say we could get little pops is you can see we're starting to show a little bit of improvement on the weekly chart. We could get a pullback and try and pop up, but I don't think they're going to be long lasting right now, just based on what the monthly looks like. It looks like it's going to be a little bit more time consuming. Okay, let's look at TROW. So this is an asset manager. Stock has been a great stock. We got a little bit, and the funny thing is, if we look at the daily chart, look at this beautiful tradable trend. Look at these pullbacks. Now, they were kind of sharp, and you would have had to go down to an hourly chart to play these most likely, but the reality is it kept on respecting the 18 and the 40. It wasn't respecting the 18, but both lines were rising throughout this whole period. That was a really nice trending period. We've only gotten one pullback to the 18 week, and it overran it. So I think this is setting up for a little bit more consolidation in the near term. We can see the MACD lines kind of pointing down. This is still trying to work off an overbought condition. So it's not negative by any stretch of the imagination. The pattern, the trend is to the upside. This is a very powerful trend, but I do think it needs more time to digest these recent, the recent gains that took place. I don't think it's spent enough time in a sideways consolidation. Okay, so Piedmont, PLL, in the materials area. I think this is pretty interesting. Now, the one thing that bugs me a little bit about the way this is setting up, if we look at this, we have a zero line reversal, and I do like to buy the break of the downtrend line when we have a zero line reversal with low ADX. The problem is that if you buy this breakout, you're going to be buying into overbought condition because we're up about 4 of the last 5 weeks, and if we get through that, you're buying kind of overbought. So when that happens, especially when we have a declining 18, you see how this line is declining? I prefer to let it break out and pull back and cup and let this 18 line start to flatten out and cup around. Now, what MACD will do is usually give you a second opportunity on maybe like a pinch or something like that. So that's what I would be looking for here, just because of the way this is played out. It's a nice looking pattern. I mean, if you want to play it, you could buy it here, but you got to give it all the way down under 50, in my opinion, if you're going to play this, because you got to give it some room. I think it's pretty volatile. So another semi here, strong stock, nice pullback and breakout recently on the weekly, had pretty good green DI confirming that move. So I think this looks pretty good. It's just the problem is now we're a little overbought. I wouldn't want to be a buyer now because of how much it's moved, and we're coming up on a big round number at 50, getting a little extended away from the 18-month line as well. I do think the target area for this is probably mid to high 50s. It would be my guess. Look at this width of this base. This is a pretty nice base. So I think there's some pretty decent room, but the risk reward of buying here is not all that great. What I mean by that is if 58, let's say 58 is our target, we've got about 8 points of upside and about 8 or 9 points of risk to this last low. So it's like 1 to 1. It doesn't attract me as much as an entry point, but I would hold this if I'm in it. SWBI. So, you know, really kind of interesting because this was building up, and look at this nice sideways consolidation pattern, and we had this MACD kind of working its way back down, low ADX pattern, and then when it kicked off, it just kind of blew it out and then has really just given it up. I'm not a huge fan of this big spiky type action like that. So I don't know that I would be interested in playing this again right now. And what I like to do is I like to look at, okay, there's the peak, and this is where the move started. So what's the midpoint of that? Right about 30, something like that. So if you want to try and play this, it's going to need a little bit more strength on the daily chart and then a pullback, but you're playing for a move to here. Don't play back to the old high in this situation. I think the resistance is up here in the high 20s, maybe 30 bucks. So that's your target area for a trade like this. But if in fact, if you're in this already, and if we don't hold here, I think that would be a big concern. Breaking 20 would be a huge negative because you'd re-enter this breakout area. And I think that would be discouraging, especially based on the way this peaked. Okay, Morgan Stanley. So this has had a very nice trend. I was talking about this obviously with the contraction and expansion phases, and notice how we just went through a contraction phase on the daily. So we're going through this consolidation phase. Now, we had a couple nice pullbacks on the weekly chart, and the ADX is still in pretty good shape, and we haven't gotten out of hand to the upside, which means we haven't gotten stretched away from this 18-week line. So this is still playable. But at this point now, because of the way this has come down and pulled back, I am waiting for this to get back up through 105. You see how 105 was kind of a key area? And once we go into a low ADX condition like that, you go from looking for, you know, unless green DI starts to show some signs of strength or something like that, I would be more inclined to wait for a new breakout at 105. So that's kind of how I'd be looking at this, but I'd still be watching this even though it is kind of extended on the weekly and definitely extended on the monthly. And when I say extended, the move started at 50 and it's going all the way up to 100. So you're not early, but it doesn't mean it can't continue to the upside. So a breakthrough 105 could be a nice trading play. NTAP. So pretty nice move. We've gotten extended on the monthly chart. We tried to eke out a new high here, breaking out above this prior peak. Haven't had a lot of follow through. So, you know, if we end up coming down through that, it could mean that this needs to spend more time consolidating while the 18-month catches up. But decent trend on the weekly chart. We've had nice pullbacks on the weekly. I just sort of question this. We've lost a little bit of momentum on the ADX, not quite as strong as it was. It's still a tradable play, but now we have this kind of low ADX condition on the daily, so I guess I'd probably be waiting for this to break out now. I don't know that I really want to play an opposing trend pattern here, even though we have zero line reversal. Just because of how extended this is, I think I'd want to get a little bit more confirmation because we're right around this kind of key area on the longer term chart. Okay, BP. So nice, you know, we made a pretty decent move here, but we ran into some resistance at 20 and we're 30 bucks, and we're coming off this pretty hard. You see how this has come down and the volume is a little big. I would let this breathe a little bit. We've gotten some pretty harsh pullbacks in some of the energy stocks. So I think there's more upside coming, but it might take 2 to 4 weeks to work off this short-term overbought condition. And the 18-month is just turning around. Doesn't really look in position quite yet. Walt Disney is pulling back. I think they have earnings coming up, so something you want to be aware of. But I do like the way this is pulling back. The overall pattern looks good. We've got a rising 18-month, pretty good trend condition based on the ADX on the monthly. I really want to see this get going on the weekly, at least get through the 40-week. I'd almost want to see it get through 185 again, something like that, to really kind of confirm. But if it turns from here and it gets through the 40-week, I think this would be pretty attractive. So maybe the earnings cause that to move to the upside and cause a breakout. That would be pretty nice. Bristol-Myers is a pretty big disappointment. I like the way this was consolidating. This was a low ADX pattern, had pretty tight pattern here and was cupping around. Low ADX, green was above red throughout. And then when it tried to get through this peak here, it didn't make it through this one, but it tried to get through this one here. It made it through and then just kind of gave it all up. So now we actually have negative ADX going. Look at that. That line is rising because red is climbing. We've got an expansion phase to the downside. So expect resistance to 60 to 62 here. Vale. So this is a little surprising because this had really nice strength to the upside, but this whole area has really kind of given it up in the way that it pulled back. We just had a really steep sell-off, a little bit more violent than I would have liked to have seen. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. Please feel free to reach out. My contact information is listed. And keep sending those stock requests to stocktalk@stockcharts.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.